Good evening and welcome to the Down on the Farm front porch where we're celebrating independence and welcoming a triple treat guest, another 2 months in a row. We have a hat trick guest who's making his third appearance on Down on the Farm. And we're sweating it out here on the front porch, but I'm visiting with my good friend and a longtime collaborator, Jeff Mitchell of the University of California. And as we always do, Jeff, we ask you first to whether you're a native of the San Joaquin Valley, and if not, where is the soil from whence you sprung? And second of all, if you are a farmer yourself, and if you're not a farmer, then how far back do we go in your family ancestry to find folks who were making their living by working the land? So thank you.
Thank you, Tom, very, very much. I am, again, honored to be here with you today on the front porch here. And I just want to start off, before I give you some of the personal stuff about my background, acknowledging really something you and I talked about a couple weeks ago, and that was oftentimes the difficulty that farmers, in my opinion, have in sharing and exchanging information. They get isolated, they get very busy, and they don't always have the time to do these kind of dialogues and exchanges. And you have been somebody who has been very doggedly persistent with this radio program and getting the word out with many, many very wonderful guests there. And I'm honored to be part of that. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. You've done an outstanding job of communicating lots of good information to people.
All right. We're going to be talking about what you've been doggedly persistent at for over 30 years in just a moment.
That's
but
true.
First of all, where does Jeff Mitchell come from?
Well, it's an unusual background, and I am not from the San Joaquin Valley, first of all, to answer your question. I was born in a very small town in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And my parents and grandparents were not farmers, and I can't call myself a farmer either. I'm one of the farming systems people that has a contribution maybe to some aspect of farming and agriculture, but not directly farming myself. I envy people like you and your wife and other farmers that I've had the good fortune of knowing, but I don't have that in my blood and my experience there. For me and our family, I think it would go back at least a couple of generations. My grandparents did have small acreage in Michigan, but it was more on the scale of gardening, I think. But they were very, very committed and passionate, very good at that kind of stuff there. But I can't claim any farming.
And you spent time on their place.
Yes, I did. Every summer I would go up there. My folks would put me on the train from Chicago, and it was the good old days of traveling as a 10-year-old on the train alone and getting my grandparents to meet me at the last stop there. But lots of good memories there.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, you've been kind of a pioneer in this region of something that you've mostly used the term for called conservation agriculture. What is conservation agriculture, and how does it differ from probably more popular term right now that's being bandied about called regenerative agriculture?
Outstanding. Good starting question here. The terms and the meanings are very similar, and maybe a little history could be important here. Globally or internationally, the notion or the term conservation agriculture first appeared in the late 1990s, 1996, I think. And it had three main principles that were associated with it. And it was largely developed in regions of the world like the Midwest and like the South American countries of Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay, where soil loss or soil erosion was a big concern. So farmers came together and they learned with folks like me researching these kind of processes that if you keep the soil covered and you don't disturb the soil, you can dramatically reduce erosion. So
what does keep the soil covered mean?
Well, what they did was they would generate and try to preserve various residues, crop material. After harvest, whatever was remaining, they would try to augment the residue that was available as a means of reducing air or wind and water erosion there. So the principles of conservation that developed in those early days were reduce disturbance, minimize tillage, keep the soil covered, and emphasize biodiversity, both in the above ground material, the things you're growing and the rotations that you use, and also in the soil biodiversity. So those were the original principles of conservation ag internationally. More recently, and they're very similar to in 2012, the NRCS in our country,
Natural Resource Conservation
Conservation
Service,
Service,
part
they
of USDA, is that right? Yeah.
USDA, that's
Yeah.
right. They launched their national program on soil health, and exactly the same principles: reduce disturbance, soil cover, emphasize diversity, extend the period of green so that you're providing materials for the soil biology to be eating for a longer period in the year. And those four or so principles eventually evolved and became what is today the buzzword regenerative ag, I think. So they're all very similar.
Isn't there a fifth principle of inclusion of animals
Yep,
in the
you're
system?
right. Yeah.
But
That's
we're going to discuss a paper that you and a bunch of co-authors just published in the last month, I would say, right, on a 20-year study that you did of these principles at the 5 Points University of California field station. And and you mentioned the four principles in here. Why do you leave out the animal as the fifth, which is animal included? That's the tough one.
Yep, you're absolutely
particularly
right.
in California.
And just to tip our hats to a farmer. It was a farmer back in Ohio when the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service launched their soil health program in 2012. They did it at the farm of a farmer named David Brandt.
Yes.
He recently passed away in Ohio, but
he was a pioneer.
He was really a pioneer, and he was somebody who really led the charge with another farmer back in North Dakota, Gabe Brown, with animal integration into the system. So it sounds like it should be an ancient practice or integration of all of these principles, and it is in lots of ways. But the awareness and the understanding that these make sense, both from science and practical reasons, is relatively recent. And the animal integration has come in the last decade, I think, as one of these additional principles of what we're talking about.
Let me just remind our listening audience, some of whom might be driving home from work this evening, that they're down on the farm front porch. And I'm your host, Tom Willey, and I'm visiting with my good friend Jeff Mitchell from the University of California, who did a pioneering study in this area, in a 20-year study of comparing tillage systems and cover cropping at the 5 Points field station in 5 Points, California, which is just about an hour directly west of here, west of Fresno, right? So actually, we're talking about, well, this guy's a pioneer for animal, integration on cropping systems. I mean, my wife's great uncle, I believe, great uncle, who unfortunately passed away before I could go visit his farm. I mean, if you go back a generation ago, all the farms in the Midwest, they all had animals and crops integrated into those systems. And they got their fertility from the animals. It was just a complete, and then crops and animals divorced themselves, and now we're sort of coming back that way. But of course, we have problems in the vegetable business, which I worked in for many years, about so-called food safety issues. But we're working. We're trying to overcome those issues of misunderstanding of the role of soil biology and microbes in all of our lives, in our personal lives, in medicine, and in soil. So you have been working for well over 30 years in integrating or to bringing these ideas, mostly in this country, that come from the Midwest, and introducing them to California farmers. And I've known you've found some success in that and some frustration in that. And so about 25 years ago, I guess, you decided, well, you know what, I'm going to I'm going to do my own demonstration at the 5 Points Field Station. I think you took, 25 acres there or something. And you set up a trial and you conducted that for 20 years. So kind of introduce us to, I think you started that in 1999, right?
Yep, right about there, 1998, I think. And we originally and curiously, we started at that time to look at the opportunities of reducing disturbance, reducing tillage as a means for improving air quality. So this project started off trying to address the dust and the particulate matter issues that were plaguing
Which
8 or so
can be
counties in
pretty
the San
significant
Joaquin
around
Valley.
here, different
And
times of the year.
and that and that early work, it showed, yeah, if you reduce disturbance, you reduce tillage, you're going to reduce dust dramatically, 75, 80%. So that was
Yeah.
a kind of a
That's a
no-brainer.
no-brainer. Yeah.
That's right. And then, but what we had in the experiment at 5 Points, we had 4 basic systems. One was just regular standard tillage, what farmers were doing in a classic tomato cotton rotation at that time.
So that would be a lot of disking and chiseling.
Land preparation and disturbance there. That's right. And generally residue-free soil surfaces. So they were clean cultivation.
Unless you got a crop growing in bare soil.
That's right. And you as an organic farmer, you already brought up, the difficulty of these things for establishing your high-value vegetable seeds. So clean cultivation. So we had standard tillage without a cover crop. Then we said, well, why don't we try to grow a cover crop in the winter period to try to get some more carbon into the soil? So we had standard tillage with a cover crop. Then we said, well, let's really test the concept here, the principles. Let's go no-till. No-till without a cover crop. And the 4th system that we evaluated was combining no-tillage to establish your crops with a winter cover crop. So 4 kind of balanced systems to compare. And we did that through a series of rotation crops that changed a little bit over time. We started with tomatoes and cotton, but then we eventually evolved into more diverse rotations because we recognized that tomatoes and cotton wasn't honoring the biodiversity principle there. So we went to garbanzos, melons and sorghum and other crops
more
there.
Diversity.
Yeah.
And let's just really quickly define what a cover crop is.
Okay, yeah, a cover crop is generally a crop that is grown in between the cash crops, all right? If there happens to be a couple of months or a season in between, for us in the San Joaquin Valley, it's the winter period when most fields typically are in annual cropping systems are bare. They don't have anything growing on them and they wait for the next summer crop to establish in the springtime. So a cover crop would serve several purposes. It could add carbon, organic matter into the soil. It could keep living roots growing throughout that winter period that would normally be bereft of anything growing there, and foster biological activity in the soil, plus the soil function benefits of just more carbon, organic matter. And also when the cover crop, depending on how it's managed in the spring, it can contribute to that other soil health principle of generating residues. You can use the cover crop to intensify or add residue to your systems there.
So in one of your treatments, we would call it, this cover crop, you would grow it. It might grow 3-4 feet high, right? And then you would mow it in the spring and just leave it in place.
That's
try to establish a cash crop through that. And then in another treatment, you would grow the cover crop and you would mow it in the spring, but then you would plow it under. Right?
Exactly right. So that second example that you just described there, typically that's called the green manure. So you would be adding, some organic material like manure, but it's cover crop material, and you'd be mixing it or incorporating it into the soil.
Yeah, another name for cover crops is green manure, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So are cover crops common are they common in California? Are they common in the rest of the United States?
Earlier, you introduced a little bit of history, and I like that very much there about saying that people have been doing this in former generations. My understanding, and I've seen some newspaper articles from York County, actually Madera County, where you live. Back in the 1940s, there were cover crop, learning opportunities like field days and extension education opportunities. So cover cropping is by no means new. It was done fairly broadly and fairly widely.
So
and
like
it's,
animal integration, it was more common
yeah,
going
for
back
sure.
a generation or two.
For sure.
Is that right?
And then people got away from that because they relied on more synthetic fertilizers and that kind of a pathway. But
So post World War II was kind of a breaking point on that availability.
I think so. That's exactly right. Yeah. And then you asked about other regions too in the Midwest. There has been a resurgence of cover crop use and adoption, particularly in the Midwest, the Southeast, in California as well. That's happened in the last 7 to 10 years, I'd say. So it used, when we started back in the late 1990s, cover cropping was certainly less than 3% of annual crop acreage, and probably lots of permanent crop acreage as well. But now it's growing
today.
Considerably.
I would say
not.
It's no more than 10%.
Yeah,
still
it's
California.
It's not dramatic.
And other than the state of Maryland, where it's over 50%,
yeah,
I would say it's not greater than 10%.
Yeah, I
anywhere
think,
else in the country. Right?
It's been
Even though
slow.
it should
That's
be.
right. Yeah.
However, the whole growing of cover crop thing has been connected with something. Oh, you know what? Let me just let me back up and re-identify our conversation, because people are listening and they may have not got in on who we are and what we're doing. This is Down on the Farm with Tom Willey. I'm your host, and we're visiting on the front porch here with Jeff Mitchell of the University of California. Jeff has been working on conservation agriculture for 30 plus years, and he and I have traded lots of information and collaborated over the years on these topics. So we're talking about your trial. So right now it's very popular to talk about cover cropping in relationship to building carbon in soil, or possibly mitigating climate change and paying farmers for storing carbon in soil. And was that a hypothesis of your trial starting out? Did you want to demonstrate that you could build a lot of carbon in soil over this 20-year period?
Initially, again, we started as a dust kind of a mitigation focus.
Yes.
But yes, eventually, once we overcame the really hard practical challenges of figuring out how do you grow crops with no tillage, then we moved into let's look a little bit more about what changes could happen in the soil with respect to carbon. What would that look like? What other soil properties and soil functions might be changing when we're very deliberately adhering to the principles of reducing disturbance, keeping the soil covered, and adding carbon? And so, yes, we eventually became more of a soil function, soil health focused study there.
Yeah, but I'm going to quote from the article here where you state that you hypothesized or presumed that the changes in carbon over this 20-year period would be modest. But is that quite true, that you knew that they were going to be modest? Because they did turn out that way. But did you have much higher hopes for building that soil that you were working with out there, Panoche clay loam? I mean, that is an awesomely productive soil.
Yep.
That's some of the finest soil in the San Joaquin Valley. When I used to farm out there, farmers would say you could eat that with a spoon, and they used to say it could make the worst dumbass farmer look like a great one, because the soil was so good. What is the native soil organic matter percentage of that soil that you were working with?
It's less than 1% for sure.
Is it less than 1%?
Yeah.
Okay,
so
even that soil.
Yeah.
Okay, so did you presumably you measured that at the beginning, and what were you guessing you might be able to achieve over 20 years or longer in growing these cover crops and minimizing tillage?
We thought that we would have measured expectations for a number of reasons. First of all, carbon, there is a lot of tillage that is done. We didn't think that and that oxidizes organic matter, and it leaves the soil as carbon dioxide. We didn't know what the potential of cover crop carbon inputs would be when we were not irrigating the winter cover crop. So we had reservations about how much carbon we're actually to be able to put into the system there.
So
And
that cover crop in the winter was left to grow on whatever rainfall
that's right.
that location received, which I can see in the article here was average is 7 inches.
That's right.
And
we
rain over a winter.
We augmented and
not a great deal.
supplemented irrigation in a couple of years, but not, in general, not there. And then the truth of the matter, Tom, and the outcome was that for the first 8 or 9 years, we saw zero change in soil carbon whatsoever. And for that matter, even the visible changes that we later saw, and that whenever you came out there and brought guests there that we could show them that were pretty dramatic and striking, that didn't happen till about a decade after we started. So it took us a long time of sustained implementation of the principles before we saw any real dramatic change in properties, including carbon. And the other rather interesting, and this is why we were quite, I think, measured or reserved about what's likely to happen, is that increasing soil carbon is not a straightforward thing. It's not an easy thing to do, and more research in the last decade or so has borne that out. So we didn't have high expectations there. But we did see, and just to skip to the chase here, we saw a slight enrichment. We saw actual significantly higher numbers in terms of soil carbon in the surface 6 inches or 15 centimeters, but not through the rest of the top 3 feet soil profile there. So, and that only happened from the no-till with cover crop system. The other cover crop system didn't increase.
So maybe we've gotten a kind of an imprecise notion of the function of carbon in soils. A lot of people have the idea that you can put carbon in soil and it's like putting it in a safety box as a as something for the future. But I'd like to just share a quote from William Albrecht, who we kind of consider the father of organic fertility systems. I don't think he was aware of that fact, but he was writing in the USDA 1938 Yearbook of Agriculture called Soils and Man. That's a classic. And I'm quoting it: attempting to hoard as much organic matter as possible in the soil, like a miser hoarding gold, is not the correct answer. Organic matter functions mainly as it is decayed and destroyed. Its value lies in its dynamic nature. So what is the function of carbon in soil?
That's a very apropos, wonderful quotation.
It's one of my favorite quotes. And this is in 1938.
And that certainly was way ahead there. And much of the understanding, I think, that you're referring to right now, scientifically, in the literature today, reflects that quotation there, because carbon, first of all, cycles. It doesn't get stored or sequestered, is the common phrase there a lot of times. It is forever dynamic and cycling around. One of the functions of carbon is obviously to provide food material, all right, for soil microorganisms there. So that's something that is a very key thing. And
as well as some for ourselves. Hopefully.
They're cycling that carbon as well.
The whole basis of life on Earth is carbon.
Yep. And so those are the other functions would be in stabilizing or creating soil aggregates. Little soil particles are stabilized together there, and carbon has a big role in aggregate stability there. So that's another thing. And that aggregation leads to porosity changes so that air can enter the soil.
So water. You want to move into that topic, because I think that's one of the more exciting findings in your 20-year study. You have become a big advocate of measuring soil aggregates. In fact, you used 5 different methods in this study to measure soil aggregation. And so and you know, I wished I could remember the person, and you might remember the person, a really good soil scientist who told us, because we've had a number of seminars over the years with different people,
Yeah.
who told us that the the most valuable single measure of soil health is the level of soil aggregation. And I can't remember
No, that's,
who that
I
is,
do
but
recall that. And
everybody's looking for what's the easy way to measure soil health. Well, there's no real easy way to soil, but aggregation is extremely valuable
no,
to
I,
demonstrate whether you have good soil health or not. So let's talk about that topic a little
I,
bit and what you found in this.
I like your lead up to this. This is very important here, and I certainly agree with the notion behind it. Uh, Aggregation is very important, and it has become one of the, let's say, diagnostic indicators for soil health that the National Soil Health Institute, which was actually partner with our project here, the Soil Health Institute, SHI, they were an outgrowth of NRCS, but they're back in North Carolina there and have done some amazing work there. And they conducted North American long-term soil health research study, and it took several years there. And our project in Five Points was one of the 124 sites throughout Mexico, Canada, and the United States that had been in place for more than 10 years there. So they actually came out, I think in 2019, conducted a whole week-long or so battery of assays, including,
That was year 20 of your study.
that's right, right around the end there. And Shannon Capolese, who was one of the partners on our project, she, they did the analysis, and out of that mass of 124 studies, some very revealing scientific papers have come out of that. And one of them, a lot of them are everything related to soil health, biology, soil physical properties, carbon, nitrogen, water related aspects of soil function. But they learned a lot, and soil aggregation became one of the 3 or 4 indicator properties that they suggest really distinguish between management impacts on soil function.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been borne out there. And it's also, you were out there many, many times with lots of visitors that we would host out there, and it became pretty dramatic.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you had some very dramatic ways of demonstrating, and there's some pretty easy ways of looking at your soil aggregation. There is one in which you would just take a clod of dirt from one system, clod of dirt from another system, and put them each in a glass of water, and just see how quickly they dissolved or held themselves together.
That's right.
And a well aggregated soil amazingly holds together in immersed in water, and because of a bunch of glues that are holding all that system together. Where do these glues come from?
Well, that's the byproducts, or the compounds that when microorganisms die in the soil, where macrofauna, where all the life of the soil is cycling, living and dying, excrement from those organisms, all of that provides the material to glue the soil particles together there. And it's hard to imagine what changes look like, but they're striking.
And I'm imagining that soil microbiology is actually, they're a bunch of architects, and they're creating an architecture in the soil that is beneficial to their livelihoods, and also turns out to be beneficial to the plants within which they are symbiotically exchanging.
What you just said perked my memory there. I think it was Peter Donovan actually who made that statement, that the most fundamental something about civilization is soil aggregation. I remember that.
Yeah,
I think that
it could be. Yeah,
maybe he got it from somebody else, but I remember him saying that there. So what we found was that with the Soil Health Institute, they had lots of fancy assays and ways of determining things, and we measured 5 different times, and they were all showing very similar results there. Very striking.
Well, there's another dramatic demonstration that Ray Archuleta, who was an NRCS soil scientist, that he came up with, where you actually simulate rainfall. over a soil sample. And you used to
We've done
you used to
similar
do
kinds
that
of
dog
things
and
there.
pony show quite
Yep.
frequently, and that's awesome.
No, what Tom's talking about here is that you spray the soil, or you add water and rainfall simulator kind of techniques there,
On
and
a table.
yeah, and you watch
Mhm.
what happens to the soil surface, the water movement through the soil, or the runoff
Right.
with different
And
soil.
so the water, if the soil is well aggregated, is
It'll-
pure and clean after it goes through the soil.
Yep.
If a soil is poorly aggregated, the water just looks
Yep.
like mud, or
It's that, and the reality is that a lot of times in the winter in the Central Valley, and particularly up north in the Sacramento Valley, when we get the rains, you see a lot of fields that where there's runoff, and water will go, not go into the soil. It'll go by gravity down to the low spots, the corners of the field there, and that results in uneven, inconsistent water distribution from rainfall. And a lot of times, some of that, on big rain events, it goes out to the roads and into the, the streams, and it never goes into the farm field there. So there are opportunities of aggregation could be very important there. And that even happens in the San Joaquin Valley when we get big time rains.
So we've reached the halfway point of our conversation. We're going to break away for a couple of the station announcements, and we'll be back in just a moment or two with speaking with Jeff Mitchell, the University of California. We're talking about the 20-year field study of comparing tillage or non-tillage and cover crops and no cover crops. And we'll be back in just a moment. Okay, welcome back to the Down on the Farm front porch, where we're sweating it out a little bit here in early July. And we're talking about soil aggregation, among other things. And there's a really great practical way to look at soil aggregation that is, it's called dreadlocks. And it's also a more scientific name for the term is rhizosheath. So if you have extra plants in your garden, you can put a shovel underneath a plant and lift the whole thing up gently and kind of give it just a little bit of a shake. But if you see a bunch of soil clinging to the roots, looking like dreadlocks, okay, on a singer, then you've got good soil aggregation, because what we've learned is that a lot of the carbon that the plant is taking in from the atmosphere and turning into sugars through the miracle of photosynthesis, a significant part of that, it's exuding out of its roots to feed the microbial system in the soil, and that causes the soil to cling to the roots. But if you pull that plant up and the roots are all bare and naked, you don't have very good soil aggregation. That's pretty simple way of having a look at it, isn't it?
You're right, and I remember to this day that the exact moment when we saw that for the first time out in Five Points, and I was with a good friend of ours, Monty Bottens, and we did exactly what you just described there. She took a shovel very carefully, and lo and behold, we saw exactly the dreadlocks that you're talking about, and it was a momentous time for me, because I'd never seen that up close like that before, and you described it very well. Yeah.
So you used also 5 different methods, much more scientific than that, to look at the aggregation of the soil at the 5-point study, and it's probably demonstrated one of the most dramatic results of this study, which is
fully agree with that. That's right. And some of these, dunking 2 clods in pans of water, and that sounds very simple, but actually the laboratory method for doing that is just with the motorized dunker with a certain number of cycles into the water and out. So it's not all that different. The other thing is that during the course of this study, there was a mobile phone app that was developed for actually taking pictures and determining aggregate stability using your mobile phone. And that also was shown to be very, very accurate and very useful there. So it's the kind of thing that farmers can very readily, very inexpensively do. And as a means to keeping, you learn a lot about changes in soil when you monitor things in very simple easy to do.
So both of your cover crop treatments, both the tillage and the no tillage, kind of doubled the quality of soil aggregation.
Yeah, that's right.
In the soil.
And then something we haven't, an extension of that, when the soil is more aggregated, you end up having, and what this is thanks to our colleagues up at UC Merced, Temrat Gazezi and his graduate student Samuel Araya, they really did some astonishing controlled environment or laboratory work where they took samples from our 5 Points field station in each of the 4 systems, and they measured lots of different things, hydraulic conductivity, how does water move into the soil and through the soil, porosity, the soil pores in the soil and how they changed, and also water storage there. And they came up with some fairly dramatic changes that they figured out that the soil in the no-tillage cover crop system developed what they called a bimodal distribution of porosity. So you had more
big words.
very an increase in very small, fine pores, and also an increase in our larger macropores. So you get the macropores that are very important for letting water in from the rainfall, from the surface.
And the micropores for hanging on to it. Is that right?
Exactly right.
So it's similar to a sponge, a sponge that you use in the kitchen.
Yep.
If you look at it, it's got big holes and it's got small holes in it, and it's kind of like that's kind of the matrix that you would be looking at in a and it holds water, right?
And these things it took us a long time to actually start seeing these or being able to measure them. But
like about how many years?
Well, probably about 8 to 12 years is when we started seeing that, and then it became very dramatic. And when you talked earlier about doing those cylinders of water and dunking soil clods in them and watching what happens, after a while it was almost foolproof. I've done 600 of those kinds of demos, and it works every time.
So one of the issues and one of the reasons why it may have taken you as long as it did to show these kind of dramatic results was you're in a very almost a desert environment. I mean, you're in what we call a semi-arid environment. Okay, you only had 7 inches of rainfall, but of the 20 years you had 12 years that were below that 7 inches. You only had 6 years that were above it, and 2 years that hit 7, bang. Okay. Unfortunately, because they're so short of water in that area, because that's the Westlands Water District, you were trying to go with that, and you were seeding these cover crops like in October in dry soil for the most part, and waiting for rainfall to bring it up and to grow it through the winter. Well, sometimes rain comes in October, sometimes it doesn't come till January. And so you were, by not starting your cover crops with at least a bit of irrigation, the ability to build large crops and biomass, you were constrained.
That's exactly right.
And so you actually have made a calculation or a projection in your article here that had you just started those cover crops with just a couple of inches of water at the beginning, that you probably could have at least doubled the biomass that you grew over the winter with those cover crops, right? So that's something you learned over time, and
that's an excellent point, and that brings into to our discussion here this afternoon another point, and that is that in areas where farmers are really finding value in cover cropping, the phrase "treat your cover crops like your cash crops" has been raised there. And Steve Groff is a farmer back in Pennsylvania, and that's one of his coined expressions there. What that means actually is what you're getting at here. And maybe, and I know this is going to be controversial, and particularly in our very water short San Joaquin Valley, but if you can dedicate a little bit of early winter season water to get that cover crop, and early, I mean, if in late November and December, you're going to get a significant growth out of that, even if we don't get a whole lot of later rain in the wintertime. So maybe an investment of a few inches. I know this sounds luxurious and people don't have that, but in the overall system, long term, over year after
You're
year.
building more capacity and more storage and more receptivity to the
And
rainfall in your system by investing a
that,
little bit in these cover crops, or a little bit more in these cover
yeah,
crops. And I know it's a controversial issue in this valley. And now that we have this Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and we have these groundwater sustainability agencies around
yeah,
here, some of them have the notion that they want to outlaw the growing of
no,
cover crops in the winter because they're consumptive of water. But you actually did another study on the side with another group of authors
yep.
on 10 different farms over 3 years, I believe, growing cover crops. And you kind of demonstrated that you can put a couple of inches of water just to get these cover crops going. And through the winter,
You
they,
just, yeah,
they don't really use additional water.
you just brought up two utterly important points there. First of all, that yes, the water use or the soil depletion during that winter period tends to be almost a wash. If you have a cover crop growing and you have next door, do you have bare soil? Yes, there's going to be more transpiration through the cover crop, but on balance, our findings were that there were very, very minimal, small, very differences there. The other aspect that we haven't hit on here, and we go back to the very beginning of our dialogue this afternoon. Where did these systems start developing and why around the world? Well, another major reason for the soil health principles of keeping the soil covered was to reduce soil water evaporation. So in farmers in some regions of the Midwest, for instance, in the Great Plains, back in the 1990s, they were not able to farm every year. They would grow a crop one year, then they had to fallow the next year
Save
in
up the
order to save
rainfall.
water,
Yeah.
and then they would come back in the third year. So that summer fallow was putting a lot of people out of business, and they learned that you do no-till, you do residue preservation and generation, that you can reduce soil water evaporation. So another aspect of our findings from this very study was that if you keep the soil covered during the typical summer ET or evapotranspiration period, you will reduce soil water evaporation by 4 to 5 inches there. So that's not trivial.
So what's the difference in temperature at a couple of inches underneath a residue mat versus bare soil, like say in July or August? Or
What would you
whatever?
think it would be? It's
Well, I
dramatic.
know a little bit about it. It's at least 20
Yep,
degrees.
exactly right.
Yeah.
20 to 25 degrees there,
Yeah.
which is dramatic. So you're cooling the soil, and in theory anyway, you'd be providing conditions for organisms not to be burned up or
Reducing
become
evaporation. And then we kind of know that soil biology checks out at what, about 110 degrees or whatever?
Yes,
They go
exactly right.
dormant or they die,
This reminds me a little bit, and I'm going to stretch the conversation a little bit here. We saw changes in the abundance, the amount of numbers of organisms, and the composition of lots of different types of organisms in this study. And some of those are referred to in the article. Everything from fungi, bacteria, nematodes, and more larger, what are called macrofauna, the critters that we can see with our eye and pick up out of the soil. They're
like a
pretty
earthworm.
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. And we saw lots of changes there, and generally, not to gloss over the findings too grossly here, but they indicated they were probably positive and leaning toward beneficial functional benefits there. That we're not talking. And by the way, if the listeners are interested in this article particularly, all they have to do is go to the online journal, just search for California Agriculture, and it's the quarterly journal, the peer-reviewed scientific journal of the University of California. And this article appeared in the May 2024 issue there.
So it'd be good to not just Google California agriculture, Google Journal California Agriculture.
Okay, that's right. Yeah.
So that it doesn't get mixed up with everything else.
Yeah,
but and the article's title is No Tillage, Surface Residue Retention, and Cover Crops Improved San Joaquin Valley Soil Health in the Long Term. And you can get that at California Agriculture, and that's a monthly journal, right?
every quarter.
It's
quarter.
quarterly
Yeah.
by the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources Division, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So another dramatic finding is the fact that if you have a cover crop in place, or if you're doing no tillage or the combination of both, the receptivity of the soil to rainfall is tremendously enhanced. People don't. I have seen there's a couple of videos of a raindrop hitting
Yeah.
soil,
Yeah.
and a raindrop hitting soil can look like a miniature atom bomb.
Yep.
And so,
So,
what's going on here? And
so
how did you improve the infiltration of water
So
so
those
dramatically in this system?
raindrops, as they're falling, they have energy associated with them, and if the soil is not well structured or aggregated,
Or
then
covered with
that's
plant
right.
material,
That's right.
living or dead.
Then
Yes.
it is exposed, and when the energy of those raindrops hits the soil, it literally blasts them up, the soil particles apart, and you get what's called dispersion or deflocculation. The soil slakes, it crusts, and it
Yeah.
will impede further water infiltration into the soil. So a lot of things are happening physically and chemically as well there, but you end up not having very good intake, or
Well,
what you were
Farmer
talking about.
Tom is going to make a confession here.
Yep.
He was not a cover crop grower.
Yeah.
He farmed organically, basically with compost.
Mm-hmm.
I was under the ignorant notion for decades that buying compost was just importing somebody else's cover crop, and I didn't have to spend the time or waste the time to grow my own. And so we had a significant problem in the wintertime because we had a lot of winter crops, but we also had bare soil, and we were actually trying to establish. We would seed some vegetables in late January and early February. Well, if we got significant rains and we had just planted a seed a half-inch deep or whatever, and we got a significant rain, the surface of the soil would turn into a hard crust like cement. Yeah. And you couldn't get that seed to come up through it. So we even went to the extent of putting floating row covers on top of the soil in order to,
My goodness,
to protect the force, protect the soil against the force of the raindrops. Okay, very expensive. The material, the labor to put it on and take it off. That was kind of the myth of Sisyphus, pushing a rock up the hill and having it roll back down on you. But yeah, and so what happens if you have a cover crop there? And of course, we haven't discussed the difficulty of establishing crops in these kind of residue systems, or growing a crop growing a cash crop in a living cover crop. That's even more difficult. But if you have a cover crop in the soil in the wintertime, the rainfall goes in and it doesn't run down to the bottom of the field and puddle and pond.
And let me switch the focus a little bit of our discussion, but it's directly related. One of the, if you think about, California does not have a lot of what's called overhead irrigation. We don't have center pivots for the most part. We don't have.
No, over in the Central Coast, we have a lot of hand line.
Okay, all right. But
a huge amount of sprinkling over there, but it's not center pivot stuff like the Midwest.
What I've learned in talking with farmers about why they have not latched on or adopted some of the center pivot irrigation, and this means overhead sprinkler irrigation for the listeners here, is because their soils don't take the water in. They don't take it fast enough because the outer span of a center pivot is applying water very fast there. And so they don't have the infiltration rates there.
Well, another reason might be because we have high magnesium content in our soils in the San Joaquin Valley too, which have a tendency to seal them as well. So that's another conversation. But
however, where I was trying to go there was that we wouldn't have had those problems with the soil that had been cover cropped and no-till. I can't imagine that happening, because the infiltration, as the article graphs show, is just astonishing. It was.
So that's kind of another thing that's in the article that I wanted to bring up with you.
Okay.
Is that for the first few years you were furrow irrigating your crops in this trial, and then I forget at what year, maybe year 10 or something, you did a buried drip irrigation, and you buried a drip line 12 inches deep.
Yeah.
Well, my criticism of that, or my reflection on that, is that the soil biology is all in the top. The potential maximum soil biology is in the top few inches of the soil. And if you have a crop growing, deep-rooted crop that's getting its irrigation from a drip line at 12 inches, it's not necessarily feeding the biology up near the surface of the soil.
No,
How well did that water wick up from that 12 inches deep
good
drip line? And
good
you
point.
probably would have enhanced biology better
I
if you
agree
had
with you. Yeah.
irrigation closer to the surface.
The only comeback I can give, I think, to that, and I certainly agree with what you just described there, is that,
And you didn't ask my permission when you did that.
but is that surprisingly, and I know this is going to be hard for people to imagine, but underneath a residue on the soil surface, there is remarkably, the water is saved, it's conserved underneath that residue, and it's remarkably moist under that. Not at all
I
times
wasn't
of the
out there
year.
digging around in that. So
No,
with that 12-inch deep
no.
drip,
What I'm saying is that there would be water would come not near to the surface, but after winter times,
oh, okay,
the remaining surface soil moisture
would
persisted.
last a lot
Yes,
longer
yes,
than
longer than
normal.
yeah.
Huh?
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think, there was a farmer out there, you and I both know, John Diener out there, and he, way back in 2003, he took me out to one of his masa cornfields, and he said, Jeff, I want you to see this field because I've gotten through the corn season with 3 fewer irrigations just by having residue from the
And
prior
that's a
crops
big
there.
deal in the Westlands
That
Water
is there.
District,
That's right.
because
Yeah,
even in a wet year like this, they're only getting half
yeah.
of their water allocations. Okay.
So we did change course. We went to drip irrigation mid-course because that's the way things were going in the valley. But I take your point about what that meant for the surface biology. Yeah.
So you said that we needed to talk about the difficulties of establishing and growing crops and the learning curve of being able to establish crops through these kind of residues on the surface. And so
I think that's very important.
Let's do that, because this may be something you do want to try at home, but we want to give people caution.
That's one of the lessons I've learned over time in my job, is you have to be cautious and full disclosure about things. It really took us several years, and by that, 3-4 years, we were failing. We could not
Particularly direct seeding cotton was very difficult to
exactly
get
right.
what we call a stand, a population of plants.
And even getting transplanted tomatoes, which you think would be easy, through the surface residue in the cover crop system. So those were challenges.
Well, there's a lot of specialized equipment that people in the Midwest have developed for doing this, but they're mostly corn and soybean people, and so they're not necessarily well adapted to California crops. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. And however, and this is something that the group of organic farmers that you and I have been working with the last 5 or so years, that I think are going to benefit from. There are now some of these companies, and we might be having a get together with them and the organic farmers at some point in the near future. They're trying to address some of the equipment needs for other, people who are interested in these kinds of approaches, reduced disturbance and high residue systems. What do they need in terms of equipment? So there are people out there on the periphery that are trying to, develop innovative tools. That's right there. I'm not going to say it's working there, but we struggle. However, what happened was, and we had lots of advisors. I mentioned Monty Bottens, the Illinois no-till farmer, who's a good friend of both of us.
Fellow.
Yeah, very good guy.
And started a company here in Madera called the California Agricultural Solutions.
That's right. And they're
a very innovative company.
And they've done a great job in transitioning, working with farmers, hand in hand in the dairy silage sector to move to strip till and no-till. So they've had a big impact here. But once we started learning, and this is just, on your knees looking at, what's happening with the seeder and those kind of things, learning the techniques, then after we got that going, we didn't have yield differences in the no-till system.
Okay, so that's another topic I want to discuss, because we, 3 or 4 organic farms and yourself and some other researchers. We did a 4 or 5 year study apart from this
Yep.
to try to do these systems in organic vegetables.
Yeah.
Well, other than by using plasticulture, we were never able to get to the point where we could have equivalent yields in vastly reduced till systems um, versus full tillage systems. And, um, and it's mostly because we couldn't get the
Exactly. Yeah.
mineralization out of the organic matter in the soil to support the crop well. And so what you don't really mention your fertility inputs in this system here very much, but with the same fertility inputs, you were able to get equivalent yields in the tillage and the no tillage in
Yeah.
this system.
So we didn't vary, and we were not doing organic inputs for fertility at all here. It was an organic study, but we kept the fertilizer inputs equal in all years.
In all
Yeah,
treatments,
everything.
but you were probably putting significant. You were put 200 pounds of nitrogen on these crops.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So in organic systems, we're very dependent on putting these cover crop residues and compost into the soil with tillage, and basically stimulating the microbial system to turn them into nutrients available to our plants. And when we leave that on the surface in organic systems in a semi-dry environment in California, it doesn't work very well. So we really weren't able to achieve in those systems, organic systems, what you were able to achieve in this conventional system with your access to food.
Definitely true there. And this is this sounds almost simple here, but one of the things that we've learned not only from this study, but and with the organic group that you were part of there, just start small. You can't risk the whole show on this thing because the risk can be very considerable.
Bit off more than he could chew, and lost a lot of money. Yeah.
And I'll tell you just a follow up to that. A long time ago, I remember a farmer coming up to me after I made a presentation somewhere. I don't remember where, but said, "Boy, not often you go to one of these meetings and you want to change what you did." Well, he did. He made some changes in his system, and he was a very small scale farmer, and he lost his entire spring tomato crop because the soil the temperatures above that mulch that he tried to preserve from the cover crop, the temperatures were low enough that the plants died, the tomato transplants died. So I hold that story to heart there, and just start small. Don't risk everything. Yeah.
Yeah, but be creative, right? I mean, because you somewhat have expressed to me a frustration in the fact that California farmers are maybe not as bold and creative as some of the folks that you have met in the Midwest.
That's an interesting topic, and I'm not sure that I can.
We don't have time. We don't have that to deal with it. We've got 2 minutes.
But it's an interesting idea. But
there's a lot of challenges right now that are telling us that we need to evolve agriculture much more rapidly than we have in the previous several generations here in California, because climate change is real and water issues are real. And
that's why the group that you were a part of, the organic farm project that we worked on the last several years there, was so utterly exciting, because people within that group, they're really doing that. They're pushing the boundaries there and coming up against, what is progress going to look like? How can we overcome these equipment, fertility, nutrient cycling challenges there, and go into a system that does make sense in terms of reducing disturbance in all forms, accentuating biological cycling in the systems, and storing nutrients and carbon in the soil system as well there. So there are lots of good things that are happening, and I was lucky to be part of that with you.
Yeah, and we've been lucky to be a part of a effort over quite a number of decades now, Jeff, and you've been out there pushing the envelope, and we appreciate it. And we've pushed the envelope on the time that we have to visit here on the Down on the Farm front porch. So we're going to thank you for listening, and I'm going to thank Jeff for being here. And in the meantime, take good care of your soil, grow your own food, harvest it, bring it in, and fix it with love on the kitchen stove for your family. And make sure you keep that soil covered with either a living crop or a dead one. We'll be back next month if we can make it. Thank you and good evening.